Why was everyone laughing at her? The Arizona heat pressed down like a weight you couldn't shake. 105 degrees. The kind of heat that made your lungs ache, made your thoughts slow, made cruelty come easier because nothing else felt real. Lieutenant Commander Blake Thornton stood at the center of the Fort Sentinel training yard with his seal trident gleaming against his chest like a medal he'd won and never stopped polishing. 6'2", shoulders built for combat, jaw cut from the same granite as the mountains behind the base. He held a tactical training collar in his right hand, leather still warm from the sun, and then he threw it. Not hard, not violent, just dismissive, the way you'd toss trash. The collar landed at the feet of a woman pushing a supply cart across the dusty compound, small, maybe 5'4" on a generous day, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that had seen better mornings. Her civilian contractor badge read one name, Willow, nothing else, no rank, no history, no respect. "Hey, supply girl." She stopped, didn't look up. "I'm talking to you." Blake's voice carried the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance, expected the world to bend. 23 people stood scattered across that training yard. Not a single one stepped forward, not a single one said stop. The laughter had started from one man and spread like wildfire catching dry brush. Now it hung in the air between them, thick and ugly. Blake crossed his arms. "The equipment you've been handing out is garbage, pure garbage. These dogs won't follow commands, and it's because of the junk collars and harnesses you keep shoving at us." Behind him, 15 Belgian Malinois stood in perfect formation, the finest military working dogs in the border program, each one worth more than most soldiers' annual salaries. Their handlers watched with varying degrees of interest, some amused, some uncomfortable, none brave enough to intervene. The woman called Willow bent down slowly, her fingers wrapped around the collar, and for just a moment her thumb traced the leather stitching with a precision that seemed almost automatic. Muscle memory buried so deep it couldn't be suppressed, but no one noticed. No one was looking that closely. They were too busy enjoying the show. "Well," Blake's voice cut through the heat, "you got anything to say for yourself?" Silence. Petty Officer First Class Amber Sutton stepped forward, blonde hair pulled into a regulation bun that somehow still managed to look like she'd spent an hour on it. She was the only female handler in the SEAL contingent. She'd clawed her way to that position with a combination of skill and a tongue sharp enough to cut glass. She looked at the woman by the cart the way you might look at something stuck to your shoe. "She can't even make eye contact," Amber said, her lip curling. Probably never seen a real military working dog outside of a YouTube video. What did they hire her for anyway? Scooping kibble. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. The kind of laughter that feels safe when everyone else is laughing too. Willow placed the collar carefully on her cart. Her hands moved to straighten the other equipment, arranging the leashes into neat coils, movements that were just a little too quick, a little too precise. For someone who supposedly just handed out supplies, 50 feet away something changed. Rex, the lead dog of the pack, lifted his head. His ears rotated forward like satellite dishes locking onto a signal. The massive Belgian Malinois, all 90 pounds of muscle and training, had been sitting perfectly still for the past 20 minutes. Now his entire body tensed, nose pointing directly at the woman by the cart. Chief Petty Officer Derek Walsh caught the movement. "Thornton, Rex is doing something weird." Blake barely glanced over. "Probably smells the dog food on her clothes. Ignore it." But Rex wasn't reacting to food. The dog's muscles had gone rigid beneath his tan coat, trembling with an energy that had nothing to do with hunger. It was a response that only experienced K9 handlers would recognize, one that took years of bonding to develop. The response of a military working dog recognizing someone from its past, someone it hadn't forgotten, someone it couldn't forget. And in the next 20 minutes, everything at Fort Sentinel was about to change. Because these 15 dogs were going to show everyone on this base exactly who their real alpha was. The woman pushed her cart toward the equipment shed. The wheels squeaked against packed dirt. a small sound that seemed impossibly loud in the tension-thick air. She'd made it maybe 30 feet when a shadow fell across her path. Amber Sutton planted herself directly in front of the cart, arms crossed, chin lifted at an angle that suggested she'd practiced this pose in front of a mirror. "Excuse me, civilian. This section of the yard is restricted during active training exercises." Willow stopped. Her eyes stayed fixed on a point somewhere around Amber's collarbone, never rising to meet the other woman's gaze. "I need to deliver these supplies to the storage unit," she said quietly. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "The handlers requested additional bite sleeves for the afternoon session." "Did I stutter?" Amber took a step closer. "Restricted. That means you walk around, take the long way. We don't need civilians wandering through our training space and distracting the animals." A reasonable person might have pointed out that the storage unit was directly behind Amber, that walking around would add an extra 10 minutes to the trip, that the equipment was needed in less than 15. Willow said none of these things. Instead, she began to turn her cart around. As she did, her gaze swept across the line of dogs with a speed that should have been impossible to track anything. But her lips moved just slightly, as if counting. 15. All accounted for. Rex, Shadow, Ghost, Titan, and 11 others, whose names she somehow seemed to know even though no one had told her. "Move faster," Amber called after her. "Some of us have actual work to do." Gunnery Sergeant Silas Porter watched the exchange from his position near the water station. He'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 of them working alongside military dogs. Something about the supply woman nagged at him. The way she'd handled that collar earlier, the way she'd scanned the dogs just now, that wasn't civilian behavior. That was something else, something trained, something deliberate. He filed the observation away and said nothing, because speaking up meant sticking your neck out. And in a place like Fort Sentinel, where reputation was currency and hierarchy was law, silence was safer. The afternoon sun had shifted by the time Willow made it back to the main training area. She'd taken the long route as ordered. Her cart now carried a fresh load of equipment that had been requested by the K-9 coordinators. Derek Walsh intercepted her before she could reach the drop-off point. "Hold up." He grabbed one of the tactical harnesses from her cart, turning it over in his hands with the exaggerated care of someone looking for any excuse to find fault. Walsh was a chief petty officer with 12 years of service and a reputation for being the smartest person in any room, at least according to himself. "This is the wrong size, size 4. These dogs need size 5 harnesses minimum." Willow's hands stayed at her sides. Size 4 is standard for Belgian Malinois within breed specifications. Size 5 would cause chafing during extended operations. Walsh's head snapped up. "Excuse me." "I'm sorry." The words came automatically, a reflex. "I just meant that the requisition form specified size 4 based on the dog's measurements." "Oh, so now the supply girl is teaching me about K-9 equipment." Walsh tossed the harness onto the ground. "I've been working with military dogs for 8 years. You've been here, what, 2 weeks, handing out kibble and picking up the occasional piece of paper." He kicked the harness toward her feet. "Pick it up. And next time maybe stick to what you know, which from what I can tell isn't much." Willow bent to retrieve the harness. Her fingers closed around the fabric with that same unconscious precision from before. Left hand finding the adjustment strap. Right hand automatically checking the quick-release buckle. A sequence that should have taken a novice 30 seconds to figure out, completed in less than 3. Silas Porter saw it. His eyes narrowed. But before he could process what he'd witnessed, a new voice cut across the yard. "Civilian contractors are required to display their identification badges at all times while on base." Colonel Marcus Hale approached with the measured stride of someone who'd spent 30 years perfecting his command presence. His uniform was pressed to perfection. His medals caught the light. He stopped 3 feet from Willow and gestured to her badge. "Yours is turned backward. Fix it." She adjusted the badge without comment. Her fingers moved with that same efficiency. That same speed that shouldn't exist in someone who'd supposedly spent their career pushing carts. Colonel Hale studied her for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. Then he turned to address the assembled handlers. I want everyone to understand something. This base operates on discipline, on order, on respect for the chain of command. That includes how we treat support staff. He paused. But it also means support staff need to understand their place. They're here to provide equipment, not opinions, not expertise. They hand things out. That's the extent of their job. Willow stood perfectly still. Her face showed nothing, but something flickered behind her eyes, something that looked like resignation, like she'd heard versions of this speech before, like she knew exactly how this story would end and there was nothing she could do to change it. The colonel walked away. The handlers dispersed, and Willow went back to her cart, pushing it toward the shed with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown all day. Unremarkable, forgettable, invisible. Except Rex was still watching her. The lead dog hadn't moved from his position, hadn't broken his focus. His entire body remained tense, locked on target, and now slowly, one by one, the other dogs were starting to notice. Shadow turned his head. Ghost lifted his ears. Titan's tail began a slow, uncertain wag. Something was happening, something the humans couldn't see, couldn't feel, couldn't understand, because they were too busy believing their own assumptions, too busy trusting their own eyes, too busy convinced that what they saw was all there was to see. But dogs don't lie. Dogs don't perform. Dogs don't pretend. And these 15 military working dogs, the finest in the program, were all starting to recognize the same impossible truth. The woman pushing that cart wasn't who she pretended to be. She wasn't weak, wasn't helpless, wasn't ignorant. She was something else entirely, something they remembered, something they'd been trained by, something they'd missed. The question wasn't whether they would react. The question was when, and what would happen when they did. What happens when a dog remembers something humans have forgotten? The evening training session was supposed to be routine, basic obedience drills, nothing complicated, nothing that should have caused any problems. Blake Thornton stood at the center of the yard with Rex at his side, confident in a way that only came from never being challenged. "Heel," he commanded, his voice carrying that same authority he'd used on the supply woman earlier. Rex didn't move. Blake frowned. "Rex, heel." The dog's ears were forward, his attention locked on something across the compound. Blake followed his gaze and saw her, the supply woman, Willow. She was near the equipment shed organizing returned gear, completely unaware she was being watched. "Eyes on me," Blake snapped, pulling Rex's attention back with a sharp tug on the lead. "We don't break focus for distractions." But Rex wasn't distracted. He was remembering. The session continued. Commands were given, some followed, some ignored. The dogs seemed restless, off their rhythm. Amber Sutton was having the same problem with Shadow. "What's wrong with them today?" she asked, frustration bleeding into her voice. "They're acting like they've never trained before." Derek Walsh shook his head. "Maybe they're picking up on something. Animals can sense things humans can't. Storms, earthquakes. Maybe there's something in the air." There was something in the air. Not a storm. Not an earthquake. Something far more unsettling for everyone who'd spent the day dismissing, mocking, and humiliating a woman they'd assumed was beneath them. Because across the compound, that woman had stopped organizing equipment. Her hands had gone still, her head had lifted, and for just a moment, so brief it could have been imagination, she looked directly at the dogs, not at the handlers, not at the spectacle, at the dogs, and her expression changed. The apologetic mask slipped, just for a second. Just long enough. What replaced it was something the handlers had never seen on her face before: recognition, sadness, and something that might have been love. Then it was gone. The mask back in place. She returned to her work as if nothing had happened. But Rex had seen it, Shadow had seen it, and one by one, like dominoes falling, the other dogs were starting to understand. Their alpha was here, had been here all along, hiding in plain sight, wearing different skin, playing a role, but they knew. The The way dogs always know. The way no amount of human deception can fool an animal that's bonded to you, loved you, trusted you, followed you into darkness and back again. "Let's call it," Blake announced, checking his watch. "We'll pick this up tomorrow. Maybe they just need rest." The handlers began, leading their dogs back toward the kennels. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual. Except Rex stopped walking, planted his feet, refused to move. "Rex, come on," Blake tugged the lead. "Don't start with me, not today." The dog pulled in the opposite direction, toward the equipment shed, toward her. "Rex," Blake's voice turned sharp. "I said come." But military working dogs are trained to make decisions, trained to assess threats, trained to know when to obey and when to trust their own judgment over their handlers. And right now, Rex's judgment was screaming at him that his handler was wrong. That the person he needed to be with wasn't Blake Thornton. That the person he'd been searching for, waiting for, missing for months, was standing 50 yards away pretending to organize leashes. The other dogs began pulling too. All of them. 15 sets of paws digging into dirt. 15 heads turning toward the same target. The handlers looked at each other with growing confusion. "What the hell is going on?" Amber demanded. "They've never acted like this before." Silas Porter stepped forward. His expression was serious now, intent. "Let them go," he said quietly. "What? Let them go?" Blake stared at him. "You want me to release 15 military working dogs in the middle of the compound?" "I want you to trust them," Porter said, "because they know something we don't." There was a moment where everything hung in balance, where pride fought against instinct, where authority clashed with wisdom. Then Blake unclipped Rex's lead. The dog exploded forward, not running wild, not out of control, running with purpose, with precision, with the kind of focused intensity that only comes from a mission. The other handlers followed Blake's lead. One by one, the dogs were released, and one by one, they followed Rex across the compound, toward the equipment shed, toward the woman who'd spent the entire day being dismissed, being humiliated, being treated like she didn't matter. She heard them coming, looked up, and her face did something extraordinary. It broke, not with fear, not with surprise, with grief, with joy, with a longing so profound it made everyone watching feel like they were intruding on something sacred. Rex reached her first, skidded to a stop, sat perfectly at attention, exactly the way he'd been trained, exactly the way he'd done 1,000 times before for only one person in the world, the person who trained him, shaped him, made him into the elite working dog he'd become. The other dogs formed a circle around her, perfect formation, perfect discipline, no commands given, no signals needed. They knew their positions, knew their roles, knew their alpha when they saw her. And the woman called Willow dropped to her knees, wrapped her arms around Rex's neck, and started crying. Not quiet tears, not dignified grief. The kind of crying that comes from someplace deep, someplace you can't control. The kind that happens when you've been pretending for so long you forgot what it felt like to be yourself. The dogs pressed closer, gentle, protective, offering comfort the way only dogs can, with presence, with touch, with the simple gift of being there. Blake Thornton stood frozen. Amber Sutton's hands had gone to her mouth. Derek Walsh looked like he'd been struck. And Silas Porter closed his eyes and muttered a single word under his breath. Jade. The name hung in the air like a confession, like a secret finally spoken, like the answer to a question no one had thought to ask. Why would a Navy SEAL handler pretend to be a supply clerk? The compound had gone silent, not the comfortable silence of routine, the heavy silence of people realizing they'd made a terrible mistake. The woman they'd called Willow, the woman they'd mocked and dismissed and humiliated, stayed on her knees with the dogs surrounding her like a protective barrier. Her shoulders shook. Her face was hidden against Rex's fur. And the 15 Belgian Malinois, the finest military working dogs in the program, sat perfectly still, guarding her, the way they'd been trained, the way they'd always done. Blake Thornton was the first to move. He walked forward slowly, like approaching something that might shatter. "Who are you?" His voice had lost its edge, lost its certainty. "Really, who are you?" She didn't answer immediately. When she finally lifted her head, her face was wet with tears, but her eyes had changed. The apologetic mask was gone. What replaced it was harder, older, carved from experiences that didn't show on the surface. "Chief Warrant Officer Jade Morrison," she said quietly. "K-9 Special Operations, Naval Special Warfare Development Group." The words landed like grenades. Naval Special Warfare Development Group. DVGRU. SEAL Team 6. The most elite unit in the United States military. Amber Sutton actually took a step backward. "That's not possible. Women aren't in DVGRU." Jade stood slowly, one hand still resting on Rex's head. "Women aren't in DVGRU combat positions, but K-9 handlers exist in a different category. We don't kick down doors. We don't breach buildings. We train the dogs that go where humans can't." She looked at each of them in turn. "And sometimes, when a mission requires it, we go undercover to places where asking questions would raise flags, where showing credentials would compromise operations, where pretending to be nobody is the only way to be effective." Colonel Hale was approaching now, his stride fast and purposeful. He looked like a man who just received a phone call that changed his entire day. "Commander Morrison," he said, using her actual rank, "I need to speak with you. Now." "In a moment, sir." Jade didn't move, didn't break eye contact with the handlers. "First, I need these people to understand something." "Commander, this is not the time." "With respect, Colonel, it's exactly the time." She turned her full attention to Blake. "You asked me if I had anything to say for myself earlier, when you threw that collar at my feet. I didn't answer then. I'm answering now." Her voice was steady, calm, the voice of someone who'd testified at congressional hearings, who'd briefed generals, who'd earned the right to speak and be heard. "I've spent the last 3 weeks on this base conducting an investigation into equipment failures that led to the death of a military working dog, a death that shouldn't have happened, could have been prevented, was prevented in programs I'd overseen before." She gestured to the equipment on her cart. "Every piece of gear I've been handing out, I've been inspecting, testing, looking for defects, substandard materials, signs of cost-cutting that put these animals at risk." Derek Walsh's face had gone pale. "The investigation, that was you." "The investigation was me. The civilian contractor identity was cover. The incompetent supply girl who couldn't make eye contact was a role." Jade's expression hardened. "And every single one of you played your part perfectly. You saw what you expected to see, someone small, someone female, someone without rank, and you treated her accordingly." The silence that followed was suffocating. Amber Sutton found her voice first. "We didn't know." "You didn't ask." Jade's words were simple, devastating. "Not once. Not when I corrected your harness sizes. Not when I knew the dogs' names without being told. Not when I handled equipment with precision that should have raised questions." She paused. "You didn't ask because you'd already decided I wasn't worth asking." Blake Thornton looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him. "Commander, I need to apologize." "You need to do more than apologize. You need to understand why this happened." Jade's voice softened slightly, not with forgiveness, with something harder, with truth. "I'm not angry that you made assumptions. I'm disappointed that you acted on them without verification, that you allowed cruelty because it felt safe, that you participated in humiliation because everyone else was laughing." She looked at each of them again. "These dogs knew who I was from day one. They tried to tell you. You didn't listen. You dismissed their behavior the same way you dismissed me, because listening would have required you to question your own certainty." Rex leaned against her leg. The other dogs remained in formation. Protecting, supporting, trusting in a way humans had failed to do. Colonel Hale cleared his throat. "Commander Morrison, I think we should continue this conversation privately." "Agreed, sir." Jade gave the dogs a signal, a small hand gesture that probably meant something specific in a language only they understood. As one, they relaxed from formation. Tails began wagging. The tension broke. "But I want everyone here to consider something before I go. These dogs are the most valuable assets on this base. More valuable than equipment. More valuable than ego. And they trusted their instincts when you wouldn't trust yours." She started walking toward the administrative building, Rex at her left side, Luna appearing from somewhere to take position at her right. The other dogs fell into an escort formation. Professional. Perfect. A display of training and loyalty that made it clear who had shaped them. The handlers watched her go. Some with shame. Some with confusion. All with the growing realization that they'd failed a test they hadn't known they were taking. Sela's porter was the only one who didn't look surprised. "I knew something was off," he said to no one in particular. The way she moved, the way she handled the gear, should have said something. "Why didn't you?" Blake asked, his voice hollow. Porter shrugged. "Same reason you didn't question throwing that collar. Same reason none of us stopped what was happening. It's easier to go along. Easier to stay silent. Easier to believe what everyone else believes." Amber Sutton sat down hard on a nearby bench. "I was horrible to her. We all were. And she was investigating us the whole time." "Not us," Derek Walsh said quietly. "The equipment. She said she was looking at the equipment." "You think that's all she was looking at?" Porter's voice was dry. "She saw everything. How we treat support staff. How we handle authority. How quick we are to punch down and how slow we are to question up." He started walking toward the kennels. "And now she's going to file a report. And that report is going to include every detail of the last 3 weeks, including how DEVGRU's finest dogs recognized their handler while a yard full of so-called professionals treated her like trash." The weight of it settled on them slowly. Like cold water rising. Like realizing you'd been standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark. They'd mocked an elite operator. Humiliated someone with more combat experience than most of them combined. Dismissed expertise that had literally written the training manuals they followed. And they'd done it in front of witness after witness after witness. Blake Thornton pulled out his phone, stared at it, put it away. There was no one to call, no way to undo it, no magic words that would erase 3 weeks of casual cruelty. "What do we do now?" he asked. No one had an answer. Because the truth was, there was nothing to do. Nothing except wait for the consequences. Nothing except face the fact that they'd failed the most basic test of military service. Treating people with dignity regardless of rank. Respecting competence regardless of appearance. Understanding that the uniform doesn't always show up in the places you expect. And as the sun set over Fort Sentinel, casting long shadows across the training yard, 15 dogs sat at attention near the administrative building, waiting for their alpha. Loyal in a way humans had forgotten how to be. Perfect in a way humans would never manage. True in a way that made all the difference. How do you apologize for something you can't take back? 3 days passed. 3 days where the K9 handlers walked through their routines with the weight of shame making every movement harder. 3 days where no one made eye contact in the mess hall. 3 days where Blake Thornton woke up at 300 replaying the moment he threw that collar. Amber Sutton stopped eating. Derek Walsh filed 2 transfer requests. The base felt smaller somehow, tighter, like the walls were closing in. Jade Morrison had disappeared into meetings with Colonel Hale, with base command, with people whose titles weren't shared and whose presence wasn't explained. The investigation was ongoing, results pending, consequences unknown. The dogs trained normally, followed commands, performed their duties. But something had changed in them too. They were obedient but distant, professional but cold, like they were working for strangers instead of partners. Rex refused to engage in play behaviors with Blake. Shadow ignored Amber's attempts at bonding time. The connection that made military working dogs so effective had frayed. Not broken, just damaged. The way trust gets damaged when you realize the person holding your lead doesn't see you clearly. On the fourth morning, an announcement came over the base PA system. All K-9 personnel report to the main training yard. 800 hours, mandatory attendance. The handlers assembled with the kind of dread usually reserved for disciplinary hearings. Colonel Hale stood at the front. His expression was unreadable. Behind him, Jade Morrison stood with her arms crossed. She wasn't wearing civilian clothes anymore. She wore the uniform of her actual rank. Chief Warrant Officer insignia on her collar, combat ribbons across her chest, the trident of a naval special warfare operator over her heart. She looked different, taller somehow, or maybe they were just seeing her clearly for the first time. 3 weeks ago, Colonel Hale began, this base was selected for a covert operation, an investigation into equipment failures that resulted in the death of a military working dog during operations I cannot discuss in detail. The Department of Defense wanted answers. They wanted someone with expertise, someone who could assess our program without bias, someone who couldn't be influenced by rank or ego or politics. He gestured to Jade. They sent us one of the finest K-9 operators in military history. Someone who has trained dogs for missions most of you will never know existed. Someone whose expertise literally shaped how we conduct K-9 operations in special warfare. The handlers stood perfectly still, barely breathing. And you treated her like garbage. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Hale's voice didn't rise, didn't need to. The disappointment was devastating enough. I've read Commander Morrison's report, all of it, the equipment assessment, the training observations, and the human factor analysis. He paused. The equipment passed inspection. The training protocols are sound, but the human factor section, that's a different story. Amber Sutton's hands were shaking. Blake Thornton stared at the ground. Hale continued, his voice steady and cold. Commander Morrison documented every interaction over 3 weeks, every dismissal, every insult, every moment of casual cruelty. She also documented something else. He looked at them each in turn. Not one person intervened. Not one person questioned the behavior. Not one person showed the moral courage to say stop. The silence was crushing. I'm not going to lecture you about respect or dignity. You're adults. You know the difference between right and wrong. You chose wrong. Hale stepped aside. Commander Morrison has something she wants to say. You will listen. You will not interrupt. And when she's done, you will decide what kind of people you want to be going forward. Jade stepped forward. Her expression was controlled, professional, but her eyes carried something heavier. I didn't want to do this investigation, she said quietly. I requested someone else be assigned. I argued that my methods were invasive, unfair, built on deception. She paused. I was overruled, because the brass wanted to know not just if your equipment was failing. They wanted to know if your people were failing, if the culture at Fort Sentinel was producing professionals or just producing operators who looked good on paper. She walked closer to the assembled group. What I found wasn't surprising, it was depressing, because you're not bad people, you're competent, skilled, capable, but you're also comfortable with hierarchy, comfortable with assumptions, comfortable with cruelty when it's aimed downward instead of up. Her voice stayed level. I've worked with some of the finest soldiers and operators in the world, people who have earned every decoration, every commendation, every ounce of respect they receive. And you know what they all had in common. They treated everyone with dignity, from the lowest private to the highest general, because they understood that character isn't about how you treat your equals, it's about how you treat people who can't fight back. Blake Thornton's jaw worked. Commander, I need to say something. Not yet, Jade's tone was firm, because you need to understand what actually happened here. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This was about culture. About the environment you've created where it's acceptable to mock someone because they don't fit your image of competence. where it's acceptable to participate in cruelty because it's easier than standing alone, where it's acceptable to value appearance over capability. She stopped directly in front of Blake. You're a SEAL. You've been through selection. You've survived training that breaks most people. You know what it's like to be judged on performance instead of presumption. Yet you threw a collar at someone's feet without knowing anything about them except that they looked small and spoke softly and didn't wear a uniform that commanded respect. Blake met her eyes. I did, and I can't take it back. No, you can't. Jade's expression softened slightly. But you can learn from it. You can choose to be different going forward. You can choose to question your assumptions before acting on them. You can choose courage over comfort. She turned to address the full group. I'm not here for vengeance. I'm not interested in destroying careers or punishing mistakes. I'm interested in growth, in change, in making sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to the next person who walks onto this base without rank insignia and gets judged before they open their mouth. Amber Sutton stepped forward. Her voice was thick with emotion. Commander, I was horrible to you, deliberately, cruelly, because you were a woman in a space I'd fought to claim, and I saw you as weak, as beneath me, as someone I could punish for reminding me of every insecurity I'd ever had about not being enough. She wiped her eyes. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that I see what I did, and I'm horrified by it. Jade studied her for a long moment. Forgiveness isn't mine to give. You didn't just hurt me. You hurt yourself. You hurt the dogs. You hurt every woman who comes after you and has to work twice as hard because people like you made it clear that female operators eat their own. Amber flinched. But Jade wasn't finished. But awareness is a start. Shame is a teacher if you let it be. Use it. Let it reshape you. Let it make you into someone who builds instead of tears down. She looked back at Colonel Hale. My report includes recommendations, not just for equipment, for culture, for training, for accountability. She pulled a folder from under her arm and handed it to him. This program has the potential to be the finest K-9 operation in the military. But only if the people running it remember that excellence isn't just about performance. It's about character. Hale took the folder. Thank you, Commander. I'll implement these recommendations immediately. There's one more thing. Jade whistled once, sharp, clear. The 15 Belgian Malinois appeared from the kennels, moving in perfect formation. They crossed the yard and formed up around Jade, sitting, waiting, disciplined. These dogs deserve better than what they've been getting, not in terms of equipment, not in terms of training, in terms of partnership. They trust you completely. They follow your commands even when those commands are wrong. They love you unconditionally. And in return, they deserve handlers who see them as partners instead of tools, who respect their judgment instead of dismissing it, who understand that sometimes the dog knows things the human doesn't. She knelt down, wrapped her arms around Rex. The massive dog leaned into her with the kind of devotion that made everyone watching feel like they were intruding on something private. I trained most of these dogs from puppies. I shaped their behaviors. I taught them to trust humans even when humans didn't deserve it. And then I left them. Not because I wanted to, because the mission required it, because war doesn't care about attachments, because sometimes doing the right thing means sacrificing what matters most. She stood. They remembered me, even after months, even when I was pretending to be someone else, even when I couldn't acknowledge them the way I wanted. They knew, because dogs are honest in a way humans forgot how to be. Jade gave a command in a language that sounded like German but wasn't quite. The dogs broke formation and moved to their assigned handlers, each one sitting perfectly at attention, professional, disciplined, but their eyes kept drifting back to Jade. You're their handlers now, their partners, their family. Don't betray that trust. Don't treat it casually. Don't assume it's a given just because they're trained to obey. Earn it, every single day. The way they earn your trust by putting their lives on the line for you. She saluted Colonel Hale. My report is filed. My investigation is complete. Unless you need anything else, sir, I'm overdue in Washington. You're dismissed, Commander, and thank you. Jade turned to leave. Stopped. Looked back at the handlers one final time. I hope when I check on this program in 6 months I find something different, something better, not because I forced it, because you chose it. Then she walked away. Rex and Luna fell into step beside her. The other 13 dogs watched her go with an intensity that broke something in the handlers watching, because they understood finally what they'd missed, what they'd failed to see, what they'd been too comfortable to notice. The woman they'd dismissed was the person those dogs would have followed into hell and back. And they'd spent 3 weeks treating her like she was nothing. Silas Porter spoke first. His voice was quiet but clear. I think we have work to do. Blake Thornton nodded. A lot of work. Then let's get started, Amber said. Let's be people those dogs can be proud of. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was a beginning. And sometimes that's all you get. A chance to do better, a chance to be better, a chance to transform shame into something useful. The training yard emptied slowly. The dogs returned to routine. The sun climbed higher, but something had shifted, something permanent. The kind of change that happens when you're forced to see yourself clearly and don't like what you find. The kind of change that only happens when someone shows you what dignity looks like, even when they have every right to be cruel. Sometimes the hardest lessons come from people you underestimated. Sometimes the most powerful words are the ones spoken softly. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who doesn't need to prove it. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.